Yo, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, we got a special one because we're going to get a little nerdy. You're about to watch one of my favorite chapters from the full production course I made about my Wild Ride remix for KSHMR. I wanted to make this chapter completely free for you guys, but if you do enjoy the content and you want more, I made a full 3.5-hour deep dive, a full-on production course that's now available on my Patreon shop. We go from the initial idea all the way to the mixing, mastering, and everything in between, and I go super nerdy and super in-depth. So if you're looking to level up your productions, this might be a thing for you, but I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and let's get right into it. All right, so now that we've talked about the break bass at length, now it is time to talk about the synths. The synths are going to help support that bass and really enhance that dark vibe that we're going for. So let's start from the top here. We've got a few elements in the break synth category. Let's start with the buzzer flutter bed. It sounds like this. And this is actually a sample I made a while ago and included in my Patreon pack. It sounds like this originally. Really cool sound. It's like a gated vocal Atmos bed, basically. So I've pitched it up 2 semitones to the key of the track. And already, just that sound in combination with the bass. Super sick in my opinion. As far as processing goes, you're going to see this a lot, by the way. You saw this already on my bass group, but you'll see this combination of Simplon, balance, and kickstart, and sometimes G-gain. These are all different plugins that I use a lot for automation, kind of like maintenance, right? So Simplon is going to be for filtering. Fruity Balance will be for volume automation. G-gain will be if I need to do some big gain automation, like add 6 dB, which I don't even know if I wound up doing in this case. No, I didn't. So in that case, we could just completely disregard that. And then some sidechain automation. So you're going to see this kind of, not a trio. What's 4? I don't know. But you'll see this reoccurring a lot in my processing chains. But besides that, we do have Endless Smile. Now, funny enough, I actually used Endless Smile as a reverb. I didn't use it kind of like how it's intended to, which is to automate the intensity to build tension, right? In this case, I just left it at 50% and called it a day and said, hey, this is my reverb. I purposely washed it out a ton. And the reason I used Endless Smile over, let's say, Valhalla Room is because Endless Smile, as you crank the intensity on this soft preset, it thins out the sample, or it thins out the signal rather, and it also just has a very nice bright reverb that I think is unique to Endless Smile, and I really like it. So that's why I chose to use Endless Smile as my reverb source, and once I enable it, crazy. Now again, it is super doused in reverb, but that's intentional. I wanted it to have a lot of air and a lot of energy in the top end in regards to the reverb, because my main sound was a bass. And besides my vocal, I don't really have a lot of elements with high end. So I was trying to generate high end essentially with the reverb and have that fill it out a bit. Because without it, feels a bit empty, feels a little bit lifeless. So next up, we've got the TOU slideys. So this is from my song 2 of Us from back in the day. I literally just dragged the stem from that project, pitched it up 2 semitones, but I made these from back in the day. And again, these are some awesome atmosphere sounds. You guys are going to see that that's basically the theme right now for this break, because my bass sound is the main character and I don't want to step on its toes. I only want to enhance it. I'm doing that through atmosphere sounds. Atmosphere sounds tend to sound dark and mysterious a lot of times, so it only makes sense to complement that. But further, they're all very spacious. So from a technical standpoint, they're not going to really get in the way of the break bass. So yes, they sound cool, but also technically speaking, they're kind of out of the way. So with that being said, it was an atmosphere-filled day. So I got these slideys in, and these are great for keeping things spicy. You know, as the track progresses, you get these like random mysterious kind of like horn sound, and you're like, whoa. Kind of just keeps things interesting as the break develops. Now, another fun thing, I sampled or resampled the acapella. KSHMR had this really cool stutter in one part of his vocal. And I'm like, oh my God, that would be sick to make into an atmospheric kind of throw. So that's exactly what I've done here. I've just sliced it. And then if we go to the processing, this is what it sounds like before. And I did a little bit of treatment to make it sound nice and bright and really pop in this break. So we start with novel type character, which is one of my favorite kind of exciters. Adds a lot of brightness, adds a little bit of power back into the sound, which is great. And then we have DST, which is a distortion unit from Matt Nash, who's an amazing producer. And what I love about this is it's divided up into bands. So I kind of use this distortion unit kind of like an EQ. And the benefit is that you get different results than as if you were to use an EQ. Because it's distortion, you get the added harmonics, the added saturation, all of that fun stuff. So in this case, I'm boosting the high mids a bit and the highs, resulting in an even brighter sound. Now, of course, Baby Girl, OTT, one of my favorites of all time, no doubt, giving us that oh so nice squeeze. And then we've got Valhalla Delay and Valhalla Supermassive, respectively, with these settings. Now, the one thing that I can say is when I'm creating atmospheric kind of sounds, I love to use a combination of delay and reverb. I feel like you really can't get the vibe that you're going for just with one. So delay is to add the extra movement and motion. And then, of course, Supermassive is to give it that washed out reverb kind of feeling. But you can even hear in that reverb tail the echoes from the Valhalla Delay. So a really winning combo, in my opinion, when trying to create atmosphere sounds, is to use reverb and delay. So that is how I made that LFO vocal candy. I love that name, actually, too. But that really also helps a lot in keeping the break interesting. Now, I want to just take a very quick pause and play what we've got so far. And one thing that I failed to mention was that the buzzer flutter bed, it starts with a low pass filter and then it fully opens up as the break progresses. So it starts pretty quiet, virtually not there, but you can hear it start coming in. But yeah, I wanted to take that second to just pause and mention that these little moments of ear candy, they go such a long way. Do not underestimate how important these are. Obviously, in this case, this is a darker track, so there's a little bit more attention to the ear candy, but even in pop songs, even in quite literally any genre, ear candy is so important and is such a great way to fill out your song and make it sound more professional, to give it that extra flair, and to keep things interesting. Something that I love to think about, which could probably help you guys as well, is I never want to get bored. I want to make sure that every 8 bars or so, something interesting is happening. And that explains why I add, an ear candy here, an ear candy here, and then I bring in more synths here, and then so on and so forth. You want to make sure that in your song, every 8 bars, something interesting is happening. Now, to continue on with the synth group, we've got this super sick Atmos bed, and it sounds like this. Magic. Now, this is a vocal bed from a different song of mine that actually never came out and probably won't come out. But I'm like, hey, at least I've got this great stem that I can reuse. So I've pitched it up 1 semitone to the key of the track. And very interesting here, I learned this trick from Hardwell. Shout out Hardwell. He told me about this plugin, and what I love about it is how simple it is. It uses virtually no CPU, and it's just such a very easy way to control the stereo image of a sound. So, as I mentioned before with the respace, you need to constantly manage how wide your song is. And in this case, if I take out this MSED, which is taking down negative 5.3 dB of the sides, look how out of phase this sound is. It might sound good at face value. You might be like, oh, but it's so wide and, it's great. This is just going to present a slew of problems down the line. Trust me. You want to make sure that your sounds are in phase. And by the way, this is a super ancient version of Insight but all kind of stereo field monitors work similarly, where you want to try to hang around 0. Anytime you surpass 0 and you're going towards -1, that's when you're nearing the out of phase territory. So for me personally, I like to push the sound and have it hang around here at max, hang around 0 at max. And that's why I've used MSED, took down the side gain, and got the vocal to hang around here instead. Or the vocal Atmos, I should say. Now, this Atmos bed, I mean, it's absolutely money, and it really is the thing that ties the whole entire break together. Now we've got a full-on vibe. So sick. Now, we can talk about how the break progresses, right? I just mentioned how it's really important to keep things interesting. If I were to just keep this flowing and going, it's cool, but it's not. We got to keep things spicy. We got to keep them interesting. And that's where I introduce some more elements. Generally speaking, it's nice to slowly pack on the frequencies. So we started with like very atmospheric sounds, and now we're going to bring in sounds that have a little bit more bite, a little bit more energy, and just more frequency content in general. So the first sound I have is Sick Arp. Just a wild, wicked sample. This is a fun one. This is a doozy. So it comes from Arcade, and it's literally just me holding one note. So essentially a sample. But this is what it sounds like before anything. So I'm essentially turning it into an ARP, taking this random atmosphere sound and, again, turning it into an ARP. How did I do that? Well, there's a lot of processing here, so we'll go through one by one. Let me start by turning all of this off. This looks like maintenance stuff, but we'll still turn it off for right now. So I knew that first and foremost, I needed motion, and that's what even triggered the idea of adding an ARP kind of sound. So that's where Shaperbox came in. I drew this curve. And this immediately gives me that motion. Now, the first complaint that I have, number one, it feels dead. And it feels a little like it needs sauce. And that's where RC20 comes in. RC20, as you guys probably already know, is such a great plugin for adding a little bit of flair and character, especially into break sounds. So in this case, I'm using the Lush and Crunch guitar preset. I don't remember if this is default or if I wound up tweaking anything, but it adds a little bit of distortion and, again, a little bit of flair, a little bit of space, which is quite nice. Now, I also then added thermal. And this maneuver was very simple. This particular preset called Vapor Waver has a nice bit crush kind of feeling, which I knew I wanted because, again, I wanted to take this moment in the break to introduce more frequencies. And I thought if I had a nice crispy bit crush kind of sound coming from this ARP, it would be a great way to add high-end excitement. Speaking of high-end excitement, we got DST again. I love this plugin so much. And once again, using it like an EQ. So I'm taking out some lows, tiny bit of low mids, but really cranking the high mids and highs. And this is where we're seeing such a big transformation. And we're really starting to see some life breathed into the sound. Is that a word? Now it is. So this is before and after. Dead. Alive. Crazy. So next up, we've got Valhalla Ubermod. This is another really cool plugin that I love. And in this particular case, I'm using the Stereo Flange preset. Strictly for motion. You can hear that when this is off. It's definitely great. But with it, that flanger just adds a little bit of extra motion, which I love. Next, we've got, again, good old OTT. Adding a bit of a squeeze here. and a little bit more of like that final polished sound that OTT always provides, never fails. We've got kickstart. This is, simple sidechain. I think it's not even automated because I'm pretty sure the ARP only plays when there's drums playing. So I think this kickstart is just a constant. Very light sidechain though. You can even look at this as adding extra bounce as opposed to sidechaining because it's so low. But in any case, it does add a little bit of motion and also ducks a little bit of out of the way of the kick, which is also nice. So now we've got, funny enough, our first EQ in the chain. And this is just a high shelf or tilt shelf. And I love tilt shelves to quickly reshape a sound. So when I'm listening to this pre-EQ, to my ears and for the function of this sound, I'm thinking it's still a bit muddy and it's not bright enough. So a tilt shelf is one of the fastest ways that you could do that. So here's what it's doing. Again, just adding a little bit of brightness while simultaneously reducing the low mid-range. And then we have another EQ. This is just your routine low cut. Thinning out the sound quite a lot, actually. And ultimately, this is likely due to the fact that the sick ARP is not the star of the show. I'm carving out a lot of the mids that we had because really this ARP is supposed to function just in the high mids and highs. It's supposed to be something that you hear and not something that you really feel. And you also want it to be a bit distant, right? So another thing that you guys can keep in mind is that when a sound has an abundance of low mids, it's going to feel close, which is great for vocals and drop leads. But for a sound like this, and especially because I have actually some low mid instruments coming in, I need to make room for that, which is why you see a cut like this, which is pretty dramatic. Thinning out the sound a lot, but it's intentional. Next, we've got Space Control, and this is easily like top 3 most used plugins. I love, love, love Space Control, especially because we can control sounds in such a great way with a little bit more control than you could with a regular stereo imager. Now, as you remember when I showed off the vocal atmosphere bed, I used that plugin MSED. I also like to use Space Control for the same thing, but we have more control when we have the bands. I love this phase limiting feature. So watch what happens. If I remove Space Control altogether, we're out of phase, we're crazy with it. Nice and controlled. And the reason I like to have access to the different phase limiting bands or the different bands in general is because I want to make certain bands more narrow than others. And generally speaking, with the stereo image, you want it to kind of open up like a flower or a tree as you go up the frequency spectrum. So that's why you see here, like, I am limiting the lows more than I'm limiting the mids, and I'm limiting the mids more than I'm limiting the highs. So that's to make sure that the highs are, wide, and then as we move down the frequency spectrum, it gets more and more narrow. So that is Space Control. And I believe I actually had to add another mixer track and send it just to do some final processing. I've got an EQ here, removing even more lows. This must have been me struggling with, making room for the upcoming poly pad and the other pad. And actually, hold on, I'm seeing here that this is actually automated. Oh, this was automated for the intro. Okay, there you go. So I must have thought for the intro that this needed just to be a little bit thinner. So there you have it. And then, of course, as you can see here, we've got some automations. Simple high-pass filter for what looks like the buildup. Yep. And then some low-pass filter as well. And then some volume automation. So the filter, though, this looks interesting. Let's see what this is doing. Yeah. Super cool. Transitions really, really nicely. And that's due to the filtering. So I love filtering. Filtering can sometimes feel a little bit mundane and boring, but it is critical. All right, so we've got a few more sounds to run through. Next, we've got the classic polypad. It's kind of your default saw kind of sound. Nothing crazy here. Sidechain, space control, same kind of deal. And this is really to add, actually this is the first time we introduce chords throughout the whole break. This is to add some impact. You know, the way the vocal is structured, it repeats, right? Please tell me I'm right. Yes, okay. So the vocal repeats, harmonies come in. It's a great time to also introduce some more harmony in the instrumental as well. So we've got, you know, all of these cool atmosphere sounds, but now we also have this nice pad sound. So all together, you could hear what that sounds like once the pad comes in.
I still think about you. It's been a while, right? Ever since I met you, looking for a good time.
It also adds warmth. There's like so much benefit to this, but more than anything, we're keeping things interesting, right? Because if we just had all the atmospheres repeat, it's not bad necessarily, but it could get a little monotonous. And I also accompanied this polypad with something a bit more spacious. I call this the State of Trance pad. And it's just like a really washed out super saw pad. Very little to no processing. I've got a Noveltech character. And as you saw, as I bypassed the chain, it's not making that much of a difference. Just adding a little bit more brightness to the sound. But works well with the polypad. It helps keep the dreamy aspect, because ultimately this break is very dreamy and spacious. It's dark. Dreamy kind of sounds happy. It's dark and spacious. Yeah, but it's super worth mentioning once more. I can't express how important this is. As the break progresses, we're introducing more frequency content. So if I compare it, this is how the synth group starts. And then as the break develops, much fuller, fatter, and more exciting. Very, very important. Now, just to try to keep the course as concise as possible, I am going to jump to the second break just to highlight 3 other sounds and talk about them now as opposed to later, since we are talking about the break synths. Now, this is unique just to the second half of the song, but it's worth mentioning. For the second half of the song, I have this kind of hands up moment where things are feeling big and floaty, and I introduce 3 new sounds. So the first one is a dance piano. Just your classic dance piano kind of sound. I believe this is from Nexus. Yeah. It's like super classic EDM sound. And funny enough, the only processing I have is an RVox. You're like, Zane, what is going on? RVox? Yes, I love to use RVox, which is a vocal compressor, on synths as well, just because of how easy it is. Like, literally, there's 2 knobs, well, 3, I guess, but I just use the compression, and then I match the gain, and then I'm off to the races. So whenever I need something quickly compressed, I like to consider RVox sometimes. Next, we've got an analog drone, which is by no means a drone. I made this for my remix of White Horses that I did a while ago, and I just called it an analog drone, and now in my head, it's seared as analog drone. Like, I don't want to change the name. I actually tried, and nothing else makes sense to me. So in my pea-brain, analog drone makes sense, even though it's technically not functioning as a drone. Tomato, tomato, it sounds like this. Really sick sound. Comes from Analog Lab, and this is another case study where I'm going bananas with processing. It doesn't look like a huge chain, but as you can hear, it's making a world of a difference. It's really coming to life with the distortion, so I'll play that first and foremost. Yeah, it makes it like a super mean, crispy horn. Very, very epic. And then the supermassive is when you get that super wet, reverby kind of sound. But oh my god, so much space. And then an EQ to really thin it out and clean it up. So this sound, again, kind of like the ARP that we spoke about earlier. Its function is very specific. It's supposed to live in the high mids and highs. And that's because like I know I have other sounds that are going to go underneath it. Now, if the analog drone was like one of just a few sounds that we're going to be playing in this moment of the song, I would consider pulling this back, right? But I know that all of this information is going to get lost anyway. I'm going to hear the other sounds over this information. So let's cut it, because otherwise, if I don't, number one, I'm not going to hear it anyway. And number two, it's going to eat up the headroom and make the other sounds suffer. So very important to remove frequencies when not needed. Now, other than that, I think everything else is automation. This pan man is off. We can ignore that. Kickstart, if I sidechained it at some point, which I didn't in this case, and then fruity balance as well, I didn't do any volume automation, so we can just go ahead and ignore that. And then lastly, the wind-up siren. This is super cool. So this is actually another sample that I included in my Patreon pack, but I kind of transformed it a bit. So I pitched it up, and then I also did some adjustments. So I automated the pitch, kind of made it wind up like a siren. Added a nice fade to the tail, and then also added a bunch of high end back into the sound. And this was, again, just to kind of make a siren. It really leads into this section very nicely, I think. But that's all of the... Oh, actually, I'm so sorry. That's not all the break synths. Let me not jump the gun. I didn't get to talk about this yet. But we also have the crispy bass, and then that's all of the break synth. So the crispy bass, which I guess is technically a bass sound, sure. That's for the hands up moment. I felt like for this moment of the song, we needed extra energy. And I'll play what we have so far. Very epic, but I was missing that driving factor. And that's what these sorts of basses provide. These are very popular in progressive house and, I mean, tons of other genres. But it's like the buzzy, crispy kind of basses. They add so much drive. So I added that here. It only plays here in the hands up moment. And again, it's just to add that extra energy and extra bite to this section. As far as the sound goes, these sounds are pretty easy to make, and I'm sure most packs have some sorts of sounds like these. In this case, this is actually made from Ryos, who's amazing producer. And the only thing that I've done here is just add OTT and squeezed it a lot, actually. Now, I squeezed it a lot because the more you use OTT, the more of a scooped sound you kind of get, and obviously it also compresses the sound a crap ton. And I've also boosted the highs a bit here. So the whole goal with this bass was not to actually have bass frequencies, similar to, again, how I talked about with the ARP and how I talked about with the analog drone. I don't really want a lot of these frequencies to overlap with the sounds that I have. So even though I didn't actually use an EQ and carve them out, the OTT is controlling them a lot, especially with such dramatic settings. And then especially because I'm boosting the highs, we are placing an emphasis there as well. So now that we've talked about the break synths and the break bass, it's time to talk about the vocal.